That stunning by-election loss continues to rock the Liberal government this week as a growing number of Liberal MPs say the Prime Minister needs to meet with caucus after Conservatives flipped the Liberal stronghold of Toronto St. Paul's. Behind the scenes, we heard from MPs who say Trudeau needs to answer questions arising from that shocking upset, questions about the future prospects of the party and the tenability of the Prime Minister's leadership. But publicly, Liberal cabinet ministers continue to support their leader and their party's messaging.
Watching the Conservatives win in St. Paul means that, like, everything we're working on could be thrown in a trash bin. And that doesn't worry me because I'm a Liberal. That worries me because I'm a Canadian. There's no tricking people. Like, there isn't no, there's some kind of, like, message that we can put out there that's going to magically change things. People have to see who we are and what we're doing. And then they have to ask the question whether or not it's good enough.
So what is a party leader and their advisors to do in the wake of this unpopularity, but still a year and a half out from an election? David Herle has been in a similar situation to this as a former chief campaign strategist for the Liberals, and he joins us now. David, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Great to see you, David. Thanks for having me.
So you were working with Kathleen Wynne back when things were looking grim for her as the Liberal Premier of Ontario. Going into the election, she eventually lost against Doug Ford. What parallels do you see to that political dynamic to where Justin Trudeau is now nationally?
Well, I think that actually the Liberals might be federal Liberals might be in a slightly more difficult situation because what we faced in Ontario was a general fatigue with the length of time the Liberals had been in office and some serious pushback to Kathleen Wynne's leadership. But the policy agenda of the government was quite popular in the province. And what we're seeing federally is, if you look at all the polls in aggregate, is that there's both a desire for change in the faces who are governing the country, but also a desire for significant change in policy direction in the country. So that makes it pretty difficult for the incumbent to in any way manifest itself that way.
So what do you do if you're Justin Trudeau and his advisors now? Is there a lesson they can take from what you decided to do? Because Kathleen Wynne ultimately decided to stick around and go into that election campaign, which was a bit of a buzzsaw. We know the PMO is calling around, seeking feedback from caucus and trying to plot a path forward. I mean, how do you even approach that task in this kind of a scenario?
Well, there's only so much room for backroom advice, and there's obviously only so much room for campaign advisors. We have a limited role in this process. So I had conversations with the Premier about re-election prospects many, many times. And she would ask me about the leadership, not that she was going to take my answer, but she was interested in my answer. And I would tell her consistently the same thing, that probably she represented both our best chance to possibly win the election, and we were within 10 points of the Conservatives generally. So she gave us our best chance to win, but she also had the strongest possibility that we would lose quite badly. And that turned out to be the case. So I guess from that perspective, one of the things they might reflect on is what is the genuine and true risk associated with either staying or leaving, and a very cold, clear-eyed and cold-hearted assessment of that. The other thing, though, that Ms. Wynne led a very active government right through to the end, and in the last 18 months or so, introduced a number of really important initiatives that she cared about very strongly. So that's the other thing. I mean, the Prime Minister is saying that he's got a lot more he wants to do, but he's being a bit parsimonious in telling us what that is.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's two considerations, I would presume, fundamentally, in addition to the person's own ego, which is, do I have something so important to get done that I want to stay and try to do it? And the second thing is, what's the risk of me leaving versus what's the risk of me staying?
Right, and on the why stay, when I spoke to the Prime Minister last week, I asked him, what is it you want to do in a fourth term that you haven't been able to do in the first three? And his answer was to continue to meet the moment, which is a continuation of what's happening rather than a forward-looking agenda, as important as meeting the moment may be. But on that second consideration, should I stay or should I go, essentially, the consequences of me staying and the consequences of me leaving. If you were called in to speak to Justin Trudeau, the way you were with Kathleen Wynne, what would your assessment of that scenario be for him right now?
It's changed. I'll be honest, it's changed. Up until probably a year ago, I would have said that he was so significantly the most talented political person in the front bench of the government or in the Liberal Party, that his campaign skills, his continuing popularity in the province of Quebec, his ability to reach British Columbians, all made him the best chance for the Liberal Party and both the top reward for staying and probably the lowest risk um, in staying. But I mean, I think that things have hardened out in the public so considerably over the course of the past year that I've had to revise my view on that. And I'm more now of the view that he will not win. And it's conceivable, although not likely, that somebody else would. And secondly, that there's little risk that anybody could do worse than he's likely to do.
It's interesting because I listened to one of your podcasts on the Herle Burley a few weeks back where you spoke with Kyla Ron-Ellen-Fitch, who had done a deep dive on, and in particular, how Liberals feel about the Prime Minister and his possible replacements. And there's an overwhelming sentiment that people don't want his replacement, if that should happen, to be anyone closely associated with him. So the obvious choices inside the cabinet are damaged by their proximity to him, if there is any change. So how do you make a change, if you're going to make a change, that maybe doesn't raise your ceiling, but elevates your floor? Because that has to be a consideration at this point in the political cycle.
Well, that polling by Ms. Ron-Ellen-Fitch really said two things, and they're quite relevant to this discussion, both of them, which is to say that she said that of the people that are currently voting Liberal in the country, the 20% of the country that's voting Liberal, they actually don't really want Trudeau to leave. And if he were to leave, they would prefer that he be replaced by Chrystia Freeland, who represents a synonym for him, a stand-in. Same policies, same values, same approach. It was the people that the Liberal Party would need beyond the people it currently has in order to actually win an election that didn't want anything to do with people who'd been part of this government. And we're looking for something completely different. And that's not unusual. I remember doing some polling for Christy Clark back when she was thinking about running for the leadership of the BC Liberal Party. And what that polling showed me at the time was that the only person that could possibly win an election for the BC Liberal Party was somebody who had not been in Gordon Campbell's cabinet. So that's, you know, it's a fairly standard thing that people say, well, I want change. So, I mean, the Liberal Party federally is in this position now where if the Prime Minister's staying, and he's asserting aggressively that he is, if the Prime Minister's staying, he needs to change virtually everything else. I mean, the country's in such a mood for change, and he's the obvious thing to change. And if the party's going to frustrate that desire for change, then the direction, the signature policy items, the key people you see around him in the cabinet, et cetera, there's going to have to be wholesale change. Taking the status quo into another election, it's like walking straight into a wood chipper.
So where do you think it goes, David? Like, what, you know, I don't know if you have any particular insight into what they're planning and what they're thinking. I know there's an agitation in the caucus looking for a caucus meeting so they can clear the air and maybe finish the conversation they started in London, Ontario at the Summer Caucus Retreat a year ago. So far, that doesn't seem to be happening. There's no evidence he's going to change his staff around him, and there's some disagreement over whether he even should. What do you think Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his inner circle land on over the next week or so as a next step?
Absolutely nothing of any consequence. I don't think they will change anything. I don't think he will change senior staff. I think a year from now, Chrystia Freeland is still the Minister of Finance, and Mr. Trudeau is still in his job, although likely thinking about resigning then. David, I've had a theory about this for a long time. Being the Prime Minister of Canada is evidently the best job in Canada because nobody has ever quit it. Nobody has ever gotten up one morning and said, I don't want to be the Prime Minister anymore. So they leave either when they are defeated in an election or they resign facing both inevitable defeat and imminent defeat.
Right.
Those are the only circumstances in which people leave this job. And so I don't have any reason to believe he's going to be any different than that. So I expect everything to be exactly the same for the next year, and then sometime next summer or fall for Mr. Trudeau to resign.
Well, that would be awfully close to that October election date. But, you know, it's the best job and probably the worst job.
October election date's not locked in stone, is it?
Well, there's the fixed election. It has to be October 20th, and they're trying to amend it to make it October 27th. But, you know, all these things can change if you've got a willing partner. Yeah.
Constitution says 5 years.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. The idea of pushing into 2026, that might be, even Jagmeet Singh might recoil at that. David Herle, I always appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining me here today, man.
Good to see you.
There's a bit of turmoil and a whole lot of anxiety in Liberal ranks following Monday's shocking by-election loss in a riding the party had held for decades. And that's raised questions inside and outside of Liberal caucus as to how the party and the Prime Minister should respond.
People in St. Paul's made a decision, and we're responding to that. But that was about frustration of being able to express it without changing governments, and I understand that, and that message is heard loud and clear.
Everyone in caucus has a lot more work to do listening to Canadians, constituents, including the Prime Minister.
And I know that there's some hard conversations that are happening behind the scenes right now. It's almost a shame that we're not gathering as a caucus until after the summer.
Okay, some Liberals want that to happen sooner. So should the Prime Minister gather his caucus members to hash out what happened and do it quickly? We just heard from the government House Leader late this afternoon, and he doesn't think so. Have a listen to that.
Mr. Trudeau has won 3 elections. He has an extraordinary number of accomplishments and has many more yet to come. And I know that I and my colleagues from the Outaouais look very much forward to being candidates alongside him in the next federal election.
And as a follow-up, do you think caucus needs to meet following the election results before the scheduled retreat in the fall?
No, I don't.
And do you think Justin Trudeau should stay on?
As I say, it's not something that I feel comfortable to share. I think it's discussion that are being done internally. I think ultimately it's his decision, and I respect that.
Okay, we're going to talk about all of that with the Power Panel. James Moore is a former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP Cabinet Minister. And here with me in studio, Cameron Ahmad, former Head of Communications for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Cameron, start with you. Sophie Chattel there, right at the end, a new MP, not saying whether she thinks the Prime Minister should stay on, saying she's not comfortable with that. What do you make of that? It seems like an easy thing to do.
Well, I think it's a tough time for the Liberal caucus and the team broadly right now. Obviously, any Liberal past or present who comes and tells you that everything is fine is spinning and not telling you the truth. So I'm not going to do that.
No one's saying that, just so you know.
So, you know, they have to, I think what they have to do now is really take a bit of time to breathe, reflect on what's happened, listen to the message that voters sent. I think a lot of the signaling that we heard from the government and from the Prime Minister after this result was in the right direction, right? This is a wake-up call. We understand people are frustrated. We need to learn from this. We need to spend the time over the summer to figure out how we can improve and how we can really resonate better. So that's something that they all have to do together. As for a caucus meeting, that's something that I'm probably not best suited to answer on right now, but probably if there is a call for one, they're going to have to hold one before the next scheduled one. But at the end of the day, this is clearly a tough time for the entire team. What I do think, though, we need to remember is a bit of perspective in all of this. There is such a breathless call right now for all kinds of speculation and leadership questions, internal party politics, etc. When there are really important issues for the country to grapple with and Canadians care about and frankly want the government to focus on and also would want the opposition to focus on. So that's what the government needs to do when it comes back from this reflection period, is focus on those important issues.
Right. So James, you know, right now the Prime Minister is making clear, and the people around him are making clear, they're going to reflect and they're going to re-engage, and he's not leaving. And so, starting from that point, what do you think is happening right now in that reflection and re-engagement process, and what do you think they need to do and can do in the coming weeks to calm things down?
Probably prayer. You know, that something cataclysmic will happen in the Joe Biden-Donald Trump debate tonight that'll take something else in the headlines. And then, you know, maybe by this weekend, people will get so distracted by their summer vacation plans and July 1st that they'll maybe start thinking about other things. The NHL draft is coming up, so the hockey cohort of the Canadian population can focus on that. NBA draft is tonight. So the distraction, I think, is what they're hoping for. So people think about other things, but that's not going to sort of smooth over the realities of things. You know, Nick Nanos had a survey out last week that showed 17% of Canadians, a whole 17% of Canadians, think that Justin Trudeau should be the Liberal leader in the next election campaign. The last election campaign, He got 32% of the vote, and over 60% of Liberal supporters now say that he should not be the leader of the Liberal Party any longer. So it's fair for Cameron and others, and I understand the dynamic that you're in. Frankly, I've been there. The dynamic that you're in to say, we need to take the lessons. The lessons are the public is done with Justin Trudeau, and they want a new prime minister, and they want probably a new party to be in office. The Conservatives have been up and ahead of the Liberals at least 10, now 20 points in the polls for well over a year. They have a 5-to-1 fundraising lever over the Liberal Party. The public is done with Justin Trudeau. That's the public is not frustrated by inadequate access to passports. They're not frustrated by insufficient support for or approach to the capital gains inclusion rate. The public is done with Justin Trudeau being the prime minister. It's pretty simple. So the only remedy to that is the self-evident one that the prime minister is not prepared to do, and I think he's looking for a graceful exit if he can find one. But as David Herle mentioned in the last segment, that's going to be very hard for him to do in the long term.
So Andrew, James' argument that the public is done with Justin Trudeau, but Justin Trudeau may not be done with being prime minister. And so, what do you expect to see, in the runway that is there, if they are true to their word that they're going to stay and they're going to fight this next election?
I think one of the issues that happened with the by-election is it was a wake-up call for official Ottawa, especially Liberal Ottawa, that all the stuff that they believed wasn't true, that wasn't, actually in people's minds, it was just resonating in the cybersphere, actually did come home to roost. And I think that they're framing it in a difficult way, which is putting this on the Prime Minister himself. If you ask the question differently, and I saw polling this week that said, do you think the Liberals deserve to be reelected? The answer is overwhelmingly no. That's not putting Trudeau's name in it. This is something much deeper, and I think it speaks to what Cameron was saying, which is they really do need to take the summer to go figure out what it is that needs to happen to recalibrate, to reintroduce the party and the government, to the people, to show that they should, in fact, have that confidence. Now, things could turn. I mean, the economy could get better. Mortgage rates can come down a bit more. A lot of the pieces that are, as we said, out west, if you want to beat a dog, you'll find a stick. Those kind of sticks get taken away. Maybe it's not going to be quite so tough for the Liberals. But they're really facing an uphill battle to convince people who are change voters that they shouldn't continue to seek that change.
So Cameron, you were there in 2015, 2019, and 2021 as part of Team Trudeau. I've been speaking to Liberal caucus members who say the Prime Minister needs to demonstrate change, at least for the caucus. How do you demonstrate change at this stage in the life cycle of a government when clearly there's an appetite for it? How do you do it at this point?
Well, that's a big question that they have to grapple with. I mean, there's no one who can provide an answer to that in a very simplistic way at this moment. I mean, and just to what James is saying, in fairness to you, James, everything you're saying could be true, and it's absolutely a monumental challenge, a hurdle that they have to overcome. The reason I'm sounding probably a little more optimistic than most of the Liberals that you are talking to is because we also have to maintain some perspective. Not only is it, I think, largely unhelpful for everyone in the chattering class to, obsessively focus on polling and internal leadership speculation and so forth, because it takes us away from the issues. But it's also just that, speculation. There is so much that can change within a year. A year of bad polling, one negative by-election result, albeit a very bad one, something that's obviously very hard for the whole team to swallow, is not indicative of what the future may hold. It is not equal the direction that the country is going to take a year plus from now. There are so many factors that can change. And another thing that is important to remember is that one thing that all of his opponents have always done of the Prime Minister is underestimate him and count him out when he was facing some difficult situations. And all of those opponents learned the hard way that was the wrong approach to take. So I think it would be entirely premature to decide now, based on some bad circumstances, that things are going to be the same as they are right now a year from now. But the Liberal Party absolutely has to treat this moment as a critical moment, learn from it, and that's exactly what the Prime Minister said.
And that's where I'm trying for this conversation to go. Is look, Justin Trudeau is going to decide what Justin Trudeau is going to do in his own time, right? Yeah. A year of bad polling and a by-election result those are data inputs for him to consider. But James, if he is going to stay, the caucus, and a lot of them, I mean, we're up into double digits. They want to get together. They want to talk, and it's not just all people who didn't get into cabinet who are anxious and frustrated right now. So, what are the steps you start taking over the summer to secure your ability to stay and deal with the issues as Cameron has outlined?
Leaders typically don't survive if their personal popularity is a drag on the party. If a party is more popular than the leader, leaders typically don't survive. And Justin Trudeau is clearly a drag on the party. He's the most unpopular prime minister polling-wise, I think, in my lifetime. I think the worse than the naders and the worst parts of the post-GST Brian Mulroney numbers. He is way down there, and it is an absolute drag. This idea that you can pump up the Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau can just kind of be the leader and then they'll maybe come back and he's been underestimated. You know, we have a parliamentary style government, but we have presidential style politics in this country. We do. You know, the news media, the way that our campaigns are run, the way that the emphasis on the leaders, it's all about the leader in our election and campaign by following the leaders all over the country. And yes, we have 343 candidates the next campaign, but it's leader centric. And when the leader is an absolute drag, and when you have over 60% of Canadians now saying they will not vote for Justin Trudeau, the absolute universe of the Liberal voting pool is 38%. 38% of Canadians are open to voting to Liberals. Only 11% of Canadians say they're certain to vote for the Liberals in the next election campaign. The numbers are lights out. So you can't pump up the Liberal Party and then the party will somehow, you know, position itself in such a way that it'll drag Justin Trudeau over the finish line successfully. It's not how the Canadian system works. That's not how our political culture is driven.
So Andrew, all the MPs I've spoken with and my colleagues, we compare notes but not names. You know, they are anxious. They want to see change. But to a person, they all say Justin Trudeau has earned the right. They are loyal to him personally, and that there is not going to be a revolt. I mean, do you think that holds? The loyalty holds because people will get more anxious the closer, I guess, you get to election time.
Well, sure, but if you're going to have a revolt, you need to have somebody to rally around, and they don't have that right now. I mean, Freeland is the carbon copy of Trudeau. Most of that cabinet is made in Trudeau's image. I mean, there's a couple of, you know, maybe the Millers or I mean, there may be one or two others in there who could position themselves as part of a different generation coming up. But by and large, there's nobody to rally around. And I think that's why, you know, my sense is that the Prime Minister is safe in that job for as long as he wants it until the election happens. And that is, you know, the problem. And when I listen to what Cameron's saying, that's a lot of whistling past the graveyard, that kind of sense of, well, don't underestimate him. He's always been underestimated. He's always come up ahead. That might be a little bit true. But I mean, this is, you know, that's like telling the electorate, look, you guys just don't get it. And after 8 years, I think they get it. They're looking for something different.
Yeah, Cameron, go ahead.
It's not my message to the electorate. It's my message to sort of this conversation that becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy when we constantly talk about, when we just focus on the speculation and the polling numbers. And the worst thing that the Liberals can do right now is treat this as not a big deal. Like, I'm absolutely saying they need to treat this as a big deal. What I'm hearing from them right now is it sounds like they are doing that. Yeah. They shouldn't do that too publicly. They have to manage these conversations internally, and that's something that Justin Trudeau managed to eliminate in large part when he took over as leader. And I think it's still, given all of these circumstances, it's still pretty impressive that the party is maintaining this degree of unity and, you know, support around his leadership despite everything that's happening. And I think that can carry forward. Okay, I got about 45 seconds.
Don't tempt fate with that last comment, Cameron. You know, there's unity until there's not. And you have one former Liberal MP out there. These, you know, this former MP from Pierrefonds-Dollard that was hardly ringing endorsement from the Liberal MP that we heard today on the bumper to this segment. You know, 343 ridings across the country. I'm sure there are reporters who are calling the Riding Association president from Nanaimo, Alberni, and the secretary of the Riding Association for Drummond, and the riding former candidate from St. John's East, and et cetera, et cetera. You know, the drip, drip, drip that's likely to come. It's entirely predictable. You've seen it in other leaderships before of people, credible or not, but will have some kind of title or presence in the party, who will drip, drip, drip over time start saying Trudeau's got to go. I think the Prime Minister needs to step down. He needs to reflect. And, you know, when you have an actual caucus members effectively saying that right now, just a couple days removed, it's going to be a long, hot summer if they don't find a way to rally things together. And then Justin Trudeau won't be given the opportunity of a dignified exit that I think he thinks he deserves.
Okay, I have to make a dignified exit because we're out of time. But I would just say that there are La Salle et Verdun. A by-election's got to be called by September. Let's see where that one goes. I want to thank the Power Panel, Cameron Ahmad, James Moore, and Andrew Thompson, and thank you all.